Hi everyone, I'm Catherine from Peace Etc. and I guide people who grew up in unstable, um, mentally and emotionally unstable homes to become safe and secure within themselves. So today I'm going to be talking about what I experienced mentally um, at the end of my marriage when I was really burning out and triggered all the time and in extreme survival mode. um, that led me to inner child healing. And I noticed that these mental consequences from being in survival mode disappeared once I began to live more freely and to remove and to let go of ways I was living in survival mode, or the ways of being I learned in order to survive. Once I let them go, I noticed that these effects or these consequences also disappeared. And I realized that they were caused by survival mode and ways of being rooted in survival mode. So I'll be reading them to you. So I had very poor mental health. I thought I was going crazy. And usually my baseline is very chill. I felt very limited in life. I had a very limited sense of perception. I experienced a lot of anxiety and chronic stress. I was always stressed out and anxious, and I was walking on eggshells all the time, afraid of when the next bomb would explode. I also experienced something like depression. I have never experienced clinical depression, but I think what I experienced was depression. I was hopeless when usually I'm a very optimistic person, and I'm very hopeful in life, myself, etc. And I also felt very lonely, and I lacked meant positive mental interaction with people because I was spending a lot of time by myself. And I know that interacting with people is also emotional, but mentally too, I felt very lonely. Yeah, and this again, there's a lot of overlap for, the emotional consequences and mental consequences, but this too, I had a lot of high days and really low days, and a lot of crashing. And these effects or these consequences of being in survival mode lasted pretty long, and especially because I was being triggered so much within a week, around the end of my marriage. And coming towards the end, the frequency of triggers, it would start maybe from once a month to twice a month, and then it'd be a couple times, every 2 weeks, and then every week multiple triggers, and these effects would have these consequences that follow having trigger and reaction, and draining conflicts like that. So yeah, it was a very rough time mentally, and I remember not having any peace at all. I didn't have any peace of mind. I could not rest my head. I couldn't rest my head. I couldn't just breathe and let my mind just wander and dream big or get creative. Also, my creativity was stunted because I didn't have that capacity or that space. I was so frizzled and anxious and running my head around, what I'm not doing, what I should be doing, all these strategies as to how I can survive that day, that I didn't have space and time for anything else. I was so out of balance. And that's the time when I felt the most out of balance. And I'm usually a very heart-centered person where I feel like energy here, but at that time when I was going through a lot of triggers and reactions and in survival mode, so extremely in survival mode, my energy was around here. I'm always thinking of how I can survive. So yeah, those are some mental consequences I experienced from being in extreme survival mode. But even when I wasn't living in extreme survival mode. Survival mode did lead to these things, these consequences that I mentioned, like stress, anxiety, feeling limited, lack of creativity, poor mental health, but in maybe a bit like a lower degree, but they were still there. So, and especially, having freed myself from survival mode, I can say that I don't experience these things. I rarely experience these things. And when I do experience them, like anxiety, for example, or stress, it's manageable. It's not out of control. So yeah, thanks for listening. If you have any comments, questions, anything about inner child healing, if you want to share your experience from living in survival mode, please feel free to share. And also, if you think that, whatever I mentioned, some consequences of being in survival mode, being rooted in survival mode, applies to you, I hope you're able to take space for yourself to see whether these are coming from being in survival mode or something else. Because for me, they disappeared once I freed myself. So, thank you so much for being here. Make sure to like, follow, or subscribe, share. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.